All right, so comets, huh? You know those cosmic snowballs with tails, the ones we used to draw as kids? Turns out our childhood drawings were just the tip of the iceberg, and you've sent us some fascinating research to unpack, including a deep dive into Wikipedia's take on comets.
It's funny how that simple image sticks with us, isn't it? But as with most things in space, the reality is far weirder and way more interesting than we could have imagined.
Well, I am ready to have my mind blown, so let's start with the basics comet anatomy. I'm a little embarrassed to admit my knowledge is pretty much limited to those three main parts: nucleus, coma, and tail.
Well, those are the building blocks for sure, but even they hold some pretty amazing surprises.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Take the coma, for example. You might picture it as like this little cloud around the nucleus.
Yeah.
But did you know a comet's coma can actually grow larger than the sun?
Wait, seriously? Now that's just showing off. Okay, I need an example. How big are we talking?
Picture this. Back in 2007, Comet Holmes had this outburst, and its comet, basically its atmosphere of dust and gas swelled up to a size even bigger than the sun. It was like the comet had a sudden case of cosmic inflation.
Okay, that's just wild. And as if giant sun-swallowing comas weren't enough, you also mentioned something about anti-tails. Now that just sounds wrong. Don't comet tails always point away from the sun?
You'd think so, right? It's
Yeah.
like they're defying the laws of cosmic physics. But anti-tails are actually an optical illusion, all thanks to the way sunlight reflects off those dust particles. Imagine driving at night. A car's headlights seem to point right at you, even though the light beams are traveling away from the car, right?
Okay, yeah, I can kind of picture that.
Yeah,
So we're seeing the dust trail from a certain angle as the Earth passes through the comet's orbit, making it look like there's a tail pointing in the wrong direction. Trippy.
exactly. It just goes to show there's more to these icy wanderers than meets the eye. Speaking of which, remember that classic dirty snowball description of comets? Turns out it's not quite that simple either.
Yeah, you mentioned we might need to update that analogy a bit. Wasn't that Fred Whipple's idea?
It was, and it was groundbreaking at the time. Whipple's model helped us understand the basic composition of comets, ice and dust all mixed together. But thanks to modern missions like Deep Impact and Stardust, we now know it's way more nuanced than that.
Okay, so we finally get to smash something into a comet. What did we learn from that? Tell me Deep Impact lived up to its name.
Oh, it definitely made a splash. When that impactor slammed into Comet Temple 1 back in 2005, it revealed there was far more ice hidden beneath the surface than we ever expected. Imagine like a whole underground reservoir of frozen water.
So comets are like those icebergs where you only see the tip. There's a whole lot more going on beneath the surface. What about Stardust? What secrets did that mission uncover?
Stardust visited Comet Wild 2 and found something completely unexpected. Crystalline dust. And this wasn't just any dust. These crystals form under extremely high temperatures, the kind of heat you'd only find in the inner solar system,
Yeah.
much closer to the sun.
Hold on. How did that scorching hot material end up in a comet, way out in the cold depths of space? That's like finding a penguin in a volcano.
It's a head scratcher, isn't it?
Hmm.
But here's the thing. This discovery completely changed how we view the early solar system. It means things weren't all neat and orderly with planets and objects forming in their designated lanes. There was mixing, there was chaos. Stuff from the inner solar system somehow got flung out to the outer regions where comets were forming.
So comets aren't just dirty snowballs. They're like time capsules, carrying evidence of the solar system's wild youth. I'm starting to see why they're so fascinating. But you mentioned something about main belt comets, which just sounds like a contradiction. Aren't asteroids and comets different things?
They are, traditionally speaking, but as we're learning, the cosmos loves to blur the lines. We're finding these objects in the asteroid belt, that region between Mars and Jupiter, that look like asteroids but act like comets. They're rocky, but they also show comet-like activity like outgassing and even tails.
So it's like they can't decide what they want to be when they grow up. Are we reclassifying asteroids now?
It's definitely shaking things up. It just goes to show that the more we learn about our cosmic backyard, the more we realize how much we don't know.
Yeah.
But that, my friend, is what makes it all so fascinating. Speaking of which, let's shift gears and talk about those crazy cometary orbits.
Okay, I'm ready for another layer of this cosmic onion. From what I remember, cometary orbits are, shall we say, a bit eccentric.
That's one way to put it. You've got your short-period comets, like the famous Halley's Comet, which
Right.
pops by the sun every 76 years or so, a regular visitor on a cosmic scale. But then you've got the long-period comets. Those are on a whole other level of orbital weirdness.
Okay, break it down for me. What makes those long-period comets so special?
Imagine a place so far away, so incredibly vast, that it makes Pluto seem like a next-door neighbor. We're talking about the Oort cloud.
Hold on, the Oort cloud, as in that's not just a sci-fi concept, it's a real thing.
Oh, it's real, all right. Though we've never actually seen it directly, it's simply too far away, and the objects there are too faint for our telescopes to pick up. But based on the orbits of long-period comets, we're pretty darn sure it's out there. Imagine a sphere of icy bodies stretching almost halfway to the nearest star, and you're starting to get the picture.
Okay, my mind is officially a little boggled. So the Oort cloud is like this distant reservoir of potential comets, but what kicks them out of their comfy orbits and sends them hurtling towards the inner solar system?
That's where things get really interesting. It's like a cosmic pinball game out there. The gravity of stars passing by, the gentle tug of the Milky Way itself, even the giant planets in our own solar system. All of these can nudge these icy bodies, sending them on these wild looping journeys that can take millions of years.
So these comets are like cosmic time travelers, carrying secrets from the very edge of the solar system. It's incredible to think that something so small, relatively speaking, can travel such vast distances. But you hinted earlier that these cosmic pinball comets could be headed our way, and that's not always a good thing, is it?
That's right. It's a bit of a double-edged sword with comets. On the one hand, we have them to thank for those dazzling meteor showers we get to enjoy.
Oh, you mean like the Perseids in August? I'll never forget camping with my family as a kid and seeing those streaks of light shooting across the sky. It felt magical.
Exactly, and every Perseid meteor is actually a tiny piece of Comet Swift-Tuttle burning up in our atmosphere.
Yeah.
Same goes for the Orionids in October. Those are thanks to our friend Halley's Comet.
Wait, so every time I wish on a shooting star, I'm actually wishing on a piece of a comet. That's even cooler than I realized. But I know it's not all meteor showers and cosmic witches. You said comets can pack a punch, too.
That they can. For starters, those impacts leave a mark literally. Just look at the craters on the moon. Some of those were caused by comets smashing into the surface. And Earth has had its fair share of cometary encounters too. Imagine the energy released when a giant chunk of ice and rock slams into a planet at thousands of kilometers per hour.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to understand why comets were seen as harbingers of doom for so long. Imagine seeing one of these bright objects suddenly appearing in the sky, seemingly out of nowhere. Our ancestors must have been terrified.
Oh, absolutely. For centuries, comets were seen as bad omens, signs of plagues, wars, you name it. There was even a pamphlet circulating after the Great Comet of 1618, blaming it for everything from earthquakes to floods. You can't really blame people for being a little superstitious back then, can you?
Not at all, especially since they didn't have the scientific understanding we have today. So, who were the pioneers who helped shift our view of comets from objects of fear to objects of scientific inquiry?
Well, we have to give a shout out to Tycho Brahe, a Danish astronomer who made some groundbreaking observations back in the 16th century. He realized that comets weren't just some atmospheric phenomenon, they were actually objects in space, far beyond the moon. That was a huge deal at the time.
So he basically shattered the old Earth-centered view of the universe, at least when it came to comets. That takes guts. Who else helped pave the way for modern cometary science?
Well, we can't forget Edmund Halley, the man who literally gave his name to the most famous comet of all. He was the one who figured out that comets could be periodic visitors. He calculated the orbit of Halley's comet and predicted its return, proving that these weren't just random events. Comets followed patterns. They followed laws of physics.
And now, centuries later, we're sending spacecraft to study these icy wanderers up close. I mean, we've landed probes on comets, even collected samples and brought them back to Earth. It's mind-blowing.
It really is remarkable. Missions like Deep Impact, Stardust, and Rosetta, they've revolutionized our understanding of comets. We're seeing these icy wanderers in a whole new light. They're not just inert balls of ice and dust. They're dynamic worlds with complex chemistry, active surfaces.
And you're telling me they might hold clues to the origins of life itself? Now that's a story I want to hear more about.
It's true. We found organic molecules, even amino acids, in cometary material. These are the building blocks of proteins, the very stuff of life.
So you're saying it's possible that life on Earth got a little kickstart from these icy messengers from space? That's incredible. It makes those old drawings of comets seem almost poetic now.
It really does, doesn't it? And the more we learn about comets, the more we realize how much more there is to uncover. Remember those interstellar interlopers we touched on earlier, like Oumuamua and Tuai-Borsov?
Oh, yeah. Comets from other solar systems just zipping through our cosmic neighborhood. What was it you called them? Postcards from distant stars?
Exactly. They're like little time capsules, not just from the early solar system, but from other star systems entirely. They offer us a glimpse into the diversity of worlds that might be out there and hint at the possibility that the ingredients for life could be scattered throughout the cosmos.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other strange and wonderful objects are out there just waiting to be discovered? What other secrets might these icy wanderers be holding?
That's the beauty of science. It's all about embracing the unknown, pushing the boundaries of what we think we know about the universe. Each new discovery, whether it's about comet anatomy, orbits, or their potential role in the origins of life, opens up a whole new realm of questions and possibilities.
This entire deep dive has been incredible. We've gone from stick figure drawings to contemplating the vastness of the Oort cloud and the very building blocks of life. It's amazing how much depth there is to these celestial objects.
You said it. They're not just dirty snowballs, are they? They're time travelers, storytellers, and maybe even key players in the grand story of life itself.
So, where do we go from here? What's next for cometary science? What's the next chapter in our understanding of these icy wanderers?
It's hard to say for sure, but that's the exciting part. We've come a long way from seeing comets as harbingers of doom, but there's still so much we don't know. The Oort cloud alone is a vast and mysterious realm, ripe for exploration, and who knows what secrets future missions to comets might reveal.
You've given me a lot to think about. Maybe the next time I see a shooting star, it won't just be a fleeting moment of wonder. It'll be a reminder that I'm looking at a tiny piece of cosmic history, a piece of the story of our solar system, and maybe even a piece of the story of life itself.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. Comets have this incredible power to connect us to the vastness of the universe and remind us that we're part of something truly extraordinary.
From comets to the cosmos, thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive.
Okay, so you know how everyone secretly wishes they could find that mythical fountain of youth? Well, today's deep dive is all about that aging. From those first little laugh lines to, like, the quest for immortality, we're going deep with excerpts from the Wikipedia article on aging. Get ready for some seriously fascinating facts, by the way.
What gets me is how we're not just like accepting aging as inevitable anymore. We're asking the big questions now, like what if we could age really well, maybe even change how long we live?
It's true. It's like, are we letting ourselves rust out or are we taking care of ourselves? Speaking of which, some organisms out there are putting our human lifespans to shame, right?
Yeah.
They're outlasting like cars and stuff.
Totally. We're talking about negligible senescence. Basically, they don't age the way we do. Think of the Hydra, biologically immortal, or the Greenland shark, swimming around for centuries.
Okay, centuries. That's insane. What does that even look like?
Imagine being born back when Shakespeare was around. Empires rising and falling, the printing press, the internet, you'd see it all and still be around today. That's the Greenland shark for you, negligible senescence at its finest.
My mind is blown. So what's the secret? How can they get to Benjamin Button it while we're stuck with wrinkles and creaky knees?
It all comes down to our cells and how they replicate, how they make copies of themselves. Remember hearing about the Hayflick limit?
Okay, high school biology was a while back. Maybe a little refresher wouldn't hurt.
Okay, picture your DNA like a shoelace. Telomeres are the little plastic tips that keep those laces from fraying. Every time a cell divides, the telomere gets shorter, more worn down. Eventually, it's so short the cell just can't divide anymore. That's one of the big things that drives aging.
So those organisms we talked about, the Hydra, the Greenland shark, they've figured out how to keep those telomere tips from wearing down.
Exactly. They have ways to maintain their telomere length, basically hitting the brakes on the aging process, at least at the cellular level.
While science is busy figuring that out for us humans, we can't ignore the signs of aging we see every day, right? Our source goes deep on those universal signs, and some of them might surprise you. For example, did you know that even teenagers experience age-related changes?
Yep. Think about that super high-pitched ringing some people can hear. It's used in some ringtones. Teens start losing the ability to hear those frequencies as they get older.
Wait a minute, so that's why I can't hear those anymore. I thought my phone was broken. So besides making me feel ancient, what other changes happen as we get older?
Well, as we get further into adulthood, things get a bit more familiar. Wrinkles start showing up, presbyopia, harder to focus on close-up stuff, and of course, the classic gray hair. Super common signs of aging.
Okay, I definitely know those. Got a few more grays popping up these days, but those seem pretty minor compared to, like, serious age-related conditions, right?
Absolutely. Wrinkles, gray hairs, they're the most obvious signs, but just the tip of the iceberg, really. As we age, our bodies become more vulnerable to, well, a lot of conditions. Osteoarthritis, heart disease, dementia, those are some of the big ones.
Which is why understanding what's happening behind the scenes in our bodies is so important. Our source talks about 9 hallmarks of aging.
Think of these like the crew behind the scenes, making all those external signs of aging actually happen. Cellular and molecular processes. We talked about telomere attrition, those shoelace tips wearing down. That's one of them.
Right. What other things are on the aging crew's to-do list?
Genomic instability is a big one. Basically, our DNA starts to accumulate damage over time.
Yeah.
Like getting scratches on a DVD, it just doesn't work as well. Then there's this thing called loss of proteostasis. It's about how well our cells can build and break down proteins, like a recycling center that gets overloaded and can't keep up.
So these hallmarks are working behind the scenes to make all the external aging stuff happen. But what tells them to start working in the first place? Is it just time? Or do certain things make them speed up?
That's the million-dollar question scientists have been trying to figure out for ages, literally. There are a few different theories out there about why we age. Some, like the DNA damage theory and the free radical theory, are all about damage building up over time.
So kind of like how too much sun without sunscreen can damage your skin.
Exactly. Free radicals are like these little troublemakers that can cause damage to our cells, like rust on a car. Then there are other theories that say aging might be programmed into our genes, at least to some extent.
So are you saying some of us are just destined to age faster than others? It's all in our DNA?
Genetics definitely play a part, but it's not the whole story. Our environment, our lifestyles, those play a huge role too. It's nature and nurture all mixed together.
So it's not all predetermined. That's good news. But how do scientists even study something as complex as aging? We can't just fast forward time and see what happens.
You're right, we can't fast forward time, at least not yet. But we can study organisms that have much shorter lifespans than humans, like yeast or a tiny worm called C. elegans. Scientists use them all the time for aging research.
So by looking at how these organisms age and what affects their lifespans, scientists can get clues about aging in general, even for humans.
Exactly. It's like studying a simpler version of a machine to understand the basic parts. These model organisms let researchers study aging in a much shorter time frame. They can experiment with different things and see how they affect lifespan.
That's really cool. Yeah. Okay, we've covered a lot about the biological side of aging. But aging isn't just about what's happening inside our bodies, is it? It affects how society sees us, how we're treated, even how we see ourselves.
That's a really important point. Aging is as much a social and cultural thing as a biological one. It shapes who we are, our roles, the opportunities we have, all throughout our lives.
And not always in a good way. Ageism is a real problem, and it seems like it's getting worse in lots of places. But before we get into all of that, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll unpack how our culture shapes the way we age. And we're back. Deep divers. So we're picking up our conversation about aging. This whole idea of how society sees getting older really got me thinking. It's kind of a big deal, right?
It's huge. We were talking about like biological immortality and all that, but imagine what that would do to society, working, retirement, families, everything would change.
Right. Imagine working with your great-great-grandkids or something. Makes our current system seem kind of, I don't know, temporary.
Totally. Our source talks about social aging. Basically, it's how different cultures view different ages, the expectations, the roles, all that. It's wild how much it varies.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, what we think of as old here might be totally different somewhere else. Got any examples?
Tons. In a lot of Asian cultures, there's a huge emphasis on respecting elders. Age equals wisdom, experience, even like a higher social status. Think about those traditional families where grandparents are super involved every day.
That's so different from how some Western cultures see aging.
Yeah.
It's like we're almost scared of it. Everywhere you look, it's all about looking younger, staying young. It's kind of a lot.
It really is. And it's not just ads and stuff, even the language we use. anti-aging creams over the hill. It all adds up to this idea that getting older is something to avoid, like something bad.
And that's not just some harmless thing, right?
Yeah.
It has real consequences.
For sure. Our source talks about ageism, which is basically being stereotyped or discriminated against just because of your age. It can be subtle, like assuming older people don't get technology, or really obvious, like not getting hired for a job, or even worse, elder abuse.
It's awful. It's like we're throwing away all this knowledge and experience. These are people who've seen incredible things, lived through huge changes. They have so much to offer.
Exactly. Their perspectives are so valuable, all the stories, the insights, everything they've learned. We're missing out if we don't listen to the wisdom that comes with age.
Totally. It makes you wonder, does our attitude about aging actually affect how we age? Like, if you're dreading getting older, does that make it worse?
That's a great question. And there's actually a lot of research that says having a positive outlook on aging is good for you mentally and physically. People who are okay with getting older tend to be healthier and happier.
Wow, so how do we change that? How do we start seeing aging as a good thing when we're surrounded by messages telling us it's not?
It's tough, but I think it starts with being aware, noticing those little ageist things we see and hear in the media, at work, even in our own heads.
So like asking ourselves why we feel like we need to hide our gray hair or why we don't want to tell people our age.
Yes, we have to
Yeah.
change the story. Instead of thinking of aging as a decline, what if we saw it as just another chapter, like another part of a long, hopefully awesome story?
I love that. But it's not just about changing our own minds, is it? We have to do something about the bigger issues, too, ageism at work, how we care for our elderly.
Definitely. Our source talks about the economic effects of an aging population, which are already happening globally. We need to rethink our systems like healthcare, retirement, social support. We have to make sure everyone's taken care of, no matter how old they are.
It's about building a world where aging is just a normal part of life, not some problem that needs to be fixed.
Exactly. It means changing how we see things, recognizing that older adults are valuable, that their experience and wisdom matter, and building connections between generations.
Couldn't agree more. This deep dive is making me want to change how people talk about getting older. But we still have some interesting stuff to get to from our Wikipedia source.
We do. Let's dig into healthy aging, what it really means, and how we can make sure we live long and awesome lives.
All right, deep divers, we're back. For the last part of our aging adventure, we've talked about the science, the social stuff. Now let's get practical. How do we actually age well?
Yeah.
Because, none of us just want to live longer, Ray. We want those extra years to be good.
Totally. It's about quality, not just quantity, right? Our Wikipedia article talks about intrinsic capacity, which, okay, sounds kind of jargony, but it's a really interesting idea.
Break it down for me. Intrinsic capacity.
So think of it like this. You've got this toolkit you carry through life. Your physical health, how sharp you are mentally, your ability to kind of roll with the punches, that's your intrinsic capacity.
So the better my toolkit, the better I'm going to handle getting older.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, it's not set in stone. We can actually make that toolkit stronger as we age.
Okay, now you're making me excited about getting older.
Yeah.
How do we keep our toolkits in good shape then?
It's not about magic, unfortunately. Mostly it's those healthy habits we all know about. Our source talks about staying active, eating well, keeping our minds engaged.
So what our doctors have been telling us all along.
Pretty much. But those things get even more important as we get older. It's like putting money in the bank for retirement. Earlier you start, the better off you are later.
I'm hearing a theme here. This whole deep dive is really saying that we're not just stuck with however we age. We can actually have a say in how it goes.
Exactly. We invested our careers, our relationships. We got to invest in our health and well-being, too. That looks different for everyone. Maybe it's walking every day, joining a book club, volunteering, or even just making sure you get enough sleep.
It's about being proactive, not just letting it happen. right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of being proactive, we should at least touch on cosmeceuticals.
Cosmeceuticals, is that like a fancy word for anti-aging creams?
It's kind of a mix of cosmetics and, medicine. They use ingredients that are supposed to improve how your skin looks, maybe even slow down some of the visible signs of aging.
So maybe we haven't found the actual fountain of youth, but hey, we can try to minimize those wrinkles if we want to.
Right. Though honestly, I think wrinkles are kind of cool. They tell a story.
I like that. Embrace the wrinkles. But seriously, this deep dive has given us so much to think about. We just scratched the surface, but we've gone from cells and telomeres to how different cultures view aging. It's a lot.
And hopefully we've all learned to appreciate this whole aging thing a bit more. It's not just about the number of years, it's about making those years good, however that looks for each of us.
Well said. So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with this. We've talked about how we age, but the bigger question is, knowing all this, how will you choose to age? It's something to think about.
Right, that's the question. We have more control than we think. The choices we make now affect how we age down the road. It'll have its challenges, definitely, but also there's so much potential for growth, for connecting with others, even for joy. It doesn't have to be a bad thing at all.
Here's to aging well, wrinkles and all. Thanks for diving deep with us, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Okay, so how often do we use the word love? I mean, we love our favorite playlist, we love our comfy pants, we love our best friend, we love our cat, even though they only pretend to like us sometimes.
You say cat, I say sourdough starter, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But what does it actually mean? Stripped of all the cliches and the Hallmark cards, I think we need a deep dive.
Yeah.
And lucky for you, we happen to have one.
Oh, perfect.
Today, we're diving into something you might not expect. The Wikipedia article on love.
All right, Wikipedia. Now, before anyone rolls their eyes at me, Wikipedia is actually a really good place to start with these things. I mean, it brings together a ton of information, so it's less about, like, discovering brand new information and more about just synthesizing what's out there. It's kind of like what we're doing, right?
Totally. And this article, it doesn't waste any time. It jumps right into what love isn't.
Yes.
Like love versus hate, love versus lust. It's like, let's clear the air before we let the love in, right?
Yeah, it's smart. Defining something can be easier if you think about what it's not. You know, like contrasting love with hate. You see, one is about connection and the other is about, like, pushing away. Did you find anything interesting in that section?
It reminded me that we use the word love for all sorts of relationships, right? And the article actually addresses this too. There's a big difference between the love we feel for, say, a family member and the love we feel for a romantic partner.
So true.
Yeah.
And they make this distinction between impersonal and interpersonal love. So impersonal is like, love for, like, objects or activities or places even. Like, I love skiing or I love this city.
Yeah, like I love a good podcast.
Exactly. But then there's the interpersonal one. That's love between people. That's where it starts to get interesting. That's where the science comes in and tries to figure out what's going on.
Okay, so we've established love is complicated, but there are people trying to figure it out for us.
Yeah, there are people who have dedicated their careers to it, like Helen Fisher. She comes at love from a biological perspective. She argues that love at its core is a drive, like hunger or thirst.
So it's less about some mystical force and more about how our brains are wired for connection.
Exactly. And just like hunger or thirst, there is a biological process that goes along with that. And Fisher, she breaks it down into 3 distinct stages: lust, attraction, and attachment.
Okay, so walk me through this. What's happening at each stage?
So lust is pretty straightforward. It's that initial surge of hormones like testosterone and estrogen that basically make you interested in mating. I always think of it as the initial spark.
Sounds primal.
It is. It's
Okay.
all about perpetuating the species. Then you move to attraction. This is where you zero in on a specific someone. And this is where it gets chemically interesting. Your brain just floods with dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. It's like a natural high, the same neurochemicals as amphetamine.
Okay, so that's why they call it intoxicating. It literally is.
Right. Though, like any good drug-induced high, that stage tends to fade after a few years. That's where attachment comes in. Attachment is all about the long game, the bonding that keeps couples together over time. And this stage is fueled by different hormones entirely, oxytocin and vasopressin.
So that blissful honeymoon phase we hear so much about, it's not really built to last.
Well, not in that initial all-consuming form.
Yeah.
But that's not a bad thing. I mean,
Yeah.
could you imagine trying to function if you were constantly on that love high?
Good point.
Those long-term bonding hormones that come with attachment, those are what help couples navigate the ups and downs of life. They're the glue that helps love endure.
It really makes you think about the different ways love can look over the course of a relationship. Okay, so we've got the biology, the hormones, the hardwiring, but obviously humans are more than just biology. So what about the psychology of love? How does that come into play?
Yeah, our brains aren't just churning out chemicals in a vacuum. Our thoughts and our feelings and our experiences all come into play. And thankfully, there are psychological frameworks that try to make sense of this. One of the most famous is Sternberg's triangular theory of love.
Triangle psychology, love. I am intrigued. Break it down for me.
Okay, so picture a triangle. Each point represents a core component of love. So there's intimacy, passion, and commitment.
Okay, I'm following.
And the interesting part is that different combinations of these components create different types of love. So for example, romantic love that head over heels can't keep your hands to yourself love. That's intimacy and passion. But notice what's missing.
Commitment. The passionate fling, full of intimacy, but no real promises for the future.
Exactly. Then you have companionate love. Intimacy and commitment, but maybe not as much of that initial fiery passion. This is often the kind of love you see in long-term friendships or family relationships, that deep care and connection that endures.
So we can use this triangle as a tool to understand our own relationships.
That's the idea. Another psychologist, Zick Rubin, he had a slightly different take. He focused on attachment caring and intimacy, and his work really dove into how those elements show up in different relationships.
Fascinating. It's amazing how something like love, which feels so intangible, can be broken down and analyzed this way. We've got the biology, the psychology, and yet something tells me there's more to uncover.
Well, absolutely. We've only really scratched the surface here, and from a very specific viewpoint, that's the Western lens. But obviously love exists in every culture, and how it's understood and expressed, that's going to vary.
Okay, so it sounds like this deep dive is about to go global.
It is.
Okay, so we are about to go on like a whirlwind world tour of love, seeing how different cultures view it, define it, celebrate it, and where better to start than with the ancient Greeks' home of democracy and some pretty epic love stories.
Right. The Greeks were really fascinated by love. In fact, they have 3 different words for it: eros, philia, and agape.
3. They were not messing around.
Yeah.
Okay, so remind us what each one represents. How are they different?
Okay, so eros is probably the one that's closest to what we think of as romantic love. It's that intense passion, that all-consuming desire. Think epic poems, star-crossed lovers, grand romantic gestures.
Okay, so Eros is the hot and heavy one. Got it. What about Philia?
Philia is more about deep friendship, brotherly love. It's based on shared values, loyalty, respect. The Greeks thought it was a more virtuous kind of love than eros because it's less about fleeting passion and more about enduring connection.
Yeah, it does seem like a much more solid foundation. And what about agape?
Agape is often described as the highest form of love. It's the most selfless, unconditional kind. The love a parent has for a child. The love that many traditions believe a divine being has for humanity. It's about loving without any expectation of anything in return.
Wow, so the ancient Greeks were really thinking about all the different facets of love. It makes you wonder if our modern ideas about love are really all that new.
That's what I love about looking at these older traditions. They have so much insight into the human experience, and it gets even more interesting as we travel to other parts of the world.
Okay, lead the way. Where are we going on our global love tour?
Let's hop over to ancient China for a minute. We've got to talk about Confucianism.
Where love is about harmony and duty. That's definitely a different perspective.
It is Confucius, who lived around the 5th century BC. He believed in Ren, which is often translated as benevolence, humanity, or goodness. It's about compassion, empathy, treating others with respect no matter their social standing.
So less about passionate declarations and more about living a life that actually reflects love.
Exactly. And Ren wasn't just about romantic love. It was about all relationships, parent and child, ruler and subject, friend to friend. It was seen as like the basis of a harmonious society.
I love that. Love is social glue.
Oh.
Okay, what other cultural interpretations stuck with you? Where else are we going?
We have to talk about Japan.
Yeah.
Like ancient Greece, they have a really nuanced way of viewing and expressing love. They have specific words that capture the different shades of love, like ai and koi.
A and koi. Break it down for us. What do those words tell us about love?
So ai is a more general term for love. It includes things like compassion and care, a deep sense of connection. You might use it to describe the love between family members or friends, or even a deep appreciation for nature or art. Koi, on the other hand, that's specifically romantic love.
So A is that broader love, and koi is that heart-fluttering romantic love. And then there's ame, right? That concept of longing for care and nurturing that you mentioned earlier.
Yes, ame is fascinating because it shows how our earliest experiences with love, like the love between a mother and child, can shape how we see love as adults. It's that feeling of wanting to be loved and cared for without any conditions.
I can see how that desire for that longing to be nurtured, how that could play out in romantic relationships, even friendships. It's almost like we're looking for that feeling of safety and security we had as children.
Exactly. It's a really interesting lens to look at our relationships through. And it just goes to show how much culture shapes our understanding of love. Our global love tour isn't over, though.
Yeah.
Let's go to India. I think things get even more intricate there.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
In some ancient Indian traditions, they don't just have different words for love, they have a whole roadmap for the journey of love. It's the 7 stages of love.
7 stages.
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to have to break this down for me.
All right, get ready for a crash course. It all starts with Preska. That's basically the initial spark of attraction. You see someone from across the room and you're intrigued. You want to know more?
It's that magnetic pull. What happens next?
If that spark is strong enough, it leads to abhalasa. Now you're moving beyond simple curiosity. You're thinking about this person all the time, daydreaming about them. You're longing to be with them.
The intrigue has deepened. What comes after longing?
Longing turns into raga. This is like a powerful, almost all-consuming desire to be with that person. Your senses are heightened. You might even experience physical things like you can't sleep or you lose your appetite. It's that can't eat, can't sleep, can't think of anything else kind of love.
This is starting to sound a little like Eros.
Right. There's definitely some overlap. And this is just the beginning. After raga comes prapti. That's the joy and the fulfillment of actually being united with your beloved.
Okay, so we've moved from that initial spark to full-blown romantic bliss. What are those last 3 stages all about?
This is where we get into the more nuanced parts of love. Mana is about attachment and possessiveness that can come up in a relationship, that desire to hold on to those feelings of love and connection.
Ah, so it's that double-edged sword of attachment, the joy of connection, but also the potential for jealousy or possessiveness. What comes after that?
Pranaya comes after mana. That signifies that the bond is deepening. You're moving away from passionate love toward a more stable, committed love. It's based on mutual respect, understanding shared values.
It's interesting. Almost every culture we've talked about seems to recognize that love naturally evolves from that initial intensity into something more stable, more enduring.
And it makes you wonder if it's hardwired into us. But we're not done yet. The final stage is sneh, which is about a love that goes beyond just the individual. It connects you to something bigger than yourself, whether that's a deep spiritual connection or a sense of oneness with humanity or love for the universe itself.
Wow, so the 7 stages are almost like a spiral, starting with that initial spark moving through passion attachment and leading to this more expansive, transcendent kind of love.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. And while this specific model is from certain Indian traditions, it really gets at that universal experience of love's ability to transform us.
It's really remarkable how no matter where we look in the world, no matter the culture or the language, there's this common thread of wanting love and connection.
It really does feel like a fundamental part of being human. Speaking of fundamental D, I think it's time we look at how different religions view and interpret love.
Okay, let's do it. Get ready, everyone, because we're about to add a spiritual dimension to our deep dive into love. Okay, so we've looked at the biology of love, the psychology, the cultural interpretations. Now let's dive into how different religions view love. I'm curious to see how different faiths have thought about this thing we call love.
Yeah, we could spend hours on this, but let's start with the Abrahamic faiths. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they have shared roots, but different perspectives on love.
Let's start with Judaism. What can we learn from that tradition?
Well, in Hebrew, the word for love is ahava. It describes love between people and God and love between people. But there's another word that adds a really interesting layer, hesed.
Okay, hesed. I can already tell there's a lot packed into that one word.
There is. It's often translated as loving kindness, mercy, or even grace. But hesed isn't just a feeling. It's about action, demonstrating love through compassion, generosity, actually doing something.
So it's love as a verb. I like that. Okay, what about Christianity? Love is obviously a huge part of Christian teachings.
Absolutely. I mean, if any religion has made love their thing, it's Christianity. One of their core beliefs is that God is love, and that love is meant to be shared unconditionally.
Right, like love thy neighbor as thyself.
Exactly. And within Christianity, they use different Greek words to explore all the nuances of love. We talked about agape, that divine selfless love, and filio, brotherly love or friendship. They even have eros, passionate love, which is interesting because it often comes up when they talk about God's love for humanity and our love for God.
Different expressions of the same source, God's love.
Yes. And you see those different types of love woven throughout the Bible and how people interpret it. And of course, there's the Apostle Paul's really famous definition of love from Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind.
I think I've seen that on a coffee mug somewhere. But seriously, it's a powerful definition. It's stuck around for a reason.
Right. It shows how these ancient texts are still shaping our ideas about love, even if we don't realize it.
And speaking of ancient traditions, let's talk about Islam. What's love's role in Islamic belief?
One of the 99 names for God in Islam is Al-Wadud. which means the loving or the most loving. So right away you see God linked with love and mercy. That idea shows up all over Islamic teachings.
It's interesting how in these different Abrahamic faiths, God is often seen as the ultimate source of love.
Definitely. It speaks to the influence these traditions have had. But there are so many other religions with interesting things to say about love. What about Buddhism? What do you think about how they approach love?
Well, I know Buddhism is all about detaching from earthly desires, like romantic love to reach enlightenment. So I'm guessing they're not big on passionate romance.
Well, it's more nuanced than that. While Buddhism encourages you to let go of clinging or craving, they also really value compassion and loving kindness, which they call metta.
So it's about finding a love that doesn't depend on outside things or getting attached. That makes sense. Like trying to experience a pure, unconditional kind of love.
Exactly. That idea of unconditional love without attachment is key to Buddhist teaching. It's about seeing how we're all connected and treating each other with compassion and kindness.
It's a beautiful idea, but probably takes a lot of work to actually live that way. Okay, we can't forget Hinduism. How does this ancient and diverse tradition view love?
Like with a lot of these traditions, there's no easy answer. Hinduism has tons of different beliefs and practices, but love is important. We talked about Kama, the pursuit of pleasure and desire, which is seen as part of life.
Right, and Prema, that selfless spiritual love. It's like Hinduism embraces both sides of love, the earthly and the divine.
Exactly. They don't shy away from how complicated it is. They acknowledge that love can be messy and passionate and difficult, but also fulfilling and a way to grow spiritually.
Wow. This deep dive has been quite the journey. We've talked about the biology of love, the psychology, all the cultural differences, and now the spiritual side of things.
It's been a whirlwind.
It really has.
Hmm?
Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
I think the biggest takeaway is that love might be universal, but it's definitely not simple. Our biology, psychology, culture, experiences, it all plays a part. It's an incredibly complex thing.
It really is. And the more we learn about those different parts, the more we understand the complexities of love in our own lives.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, we're going to leave you with this thought.
Hmm.
How do you think your own experiences and beliefs shape how you see love? Something to think about. Maybe the next time you find yourself using that word.
Until next time, happy diving.
See you in the deep end.